Welcome to Unboxing Logistics. I'm Lori Boyer. I'm your host here at EasyPost, and I have with us today as our esteemed guest, Ford Deihl from DHL eCommerce. He is going to be giving you all the ins and outs of international shipping. International shipping is massive right now. In 2024, it's expected that $6.3 trillion of revenue is going to take place internationally. And I know that a lot of our audience has been interested in kind of how to get going with that, how to expand. And so that is exactly why I've invited Ford here today to give us some of those answers. Ford, can you introduce yourself, tell us your role at DHL eCommerce, and just give us a little background?
Thank you, Lori. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So I'm a product manager at DHL eCommerce. I'm focused on cross-border solutions specifically for our small and mid-sized businesses. It's kind of a new market for DHL. Really excited to talk about that and get into it further. Before DHL, I spent a little bit of time in consulting and also on the brand side of e-commerce. So kind of have both the carrier and brand experience. Yeah, really excited to be here.
Awesome. I love it. I'm going to ask you a couple of get to know you questions, just so our audience can know the real Ford a little bit.
Sure.
And then I'm going to ask for some takeaways. So, my first question is to get to know you a little bit. Do you have a go-to comfort food? What is your go-to comfort food?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I probably have to go with like chicken parmesan. Love that. Yeah,
Really?
I'll have a chicken parmesan sandwich like any day of the week. Yeah,
Wow, yum. My daughter loves chicken parm too. Gets that like every time she can. I had to say, do you make it yourself at home
I
or?
do. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yum. See, I'm not a very good cook, so I don't, but at restaurants, that's where I get my chicken parm. Okay, one more question. Any hobbies or interests that you have? How do you spend your time these days?
Yeah. Hobby interest, all consuming kind of project. Recently bought an old house and been working on fixing it up and repairing it and renovating it. Definitely in over my head on that, but it's definitely fun to work with your hands and see what you create. So that's where a lot of my time outside of work is going right now.
I love that. I have a coworker, shout out to Alan, who in almost every other meeting you see a ladder behind him because he's always working on something too. So you got no ladder behind you, but I trust you're working on the house.
Yep, moved it just before we started recording.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so international shipping. If people have to hop off, I'm sure they're going to want to stay for the whole episode, but if somebody had to hop off right after hearing this, I want to make sure that they come away knowing a couple of key things that they can use in their business. So, what are a few takeaways that you want people to remember after this discussion today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first one you kind of previewed right at the start here. It's a growth area, and you really want to get into it. So this is a way to grow your top line for your business, a way to reach new customers, and yeah, you want to be part of that. So that's my first takeaway is get
Okay,
into
so
it.
big opportunity. This is an
Yep.
area of a big opportunity. Okay, totally agree.
Second takeaway is it's easier than you think with the right partners, the right carriers. Um, Take a look at what you're already using for your shipping solutions. There's probably something that's already available that you can leverage pretty easily. So
Yeah.
get into it because it's growing. And two, it's easier than you think.
Okay, I love that. I think that fear is probably a big factor in people not wanting to expand, fear of the unknown. You've never done it before. There's all kinds of challenges you might run into. So I love that you said it's easier than you think because sometimes that fear holds us back. So Ford, What are what are some signs that maybe people should start shipping internationally? We have a lot of companies who have kind of stuck domestically. Well, we talked about that fear a little bit. So sometimes people are scared to branch into the unknown. How can people know maybe that it is time to start shipping internationally?
Yeah. So in terms of kind of the when are you ready? I would say you should have a strong foundation domestically in a couple of key areas. Um, Principally, kind of your logistics and operations model. So some of the things I think you should be getting right domestically, or at least have a strong process in place for, or your kind of fulfillment model, your inventory management, but also have a strong customer service, customer support area in place as well. With international customers, that's an area that you probably get some more inquiries in, more where's my package questions, kind of things like that. So I would say those two areas should be prepared to scale. Uh, I would also kind of advise to have a defined brand identity or something that you're really
Mhm.
comfortable with and you're ready to take to other markets. Um, Not every brand is going to work in every market, but having a focused identity and being able to market that identity, I think will do a lot better in terms of getting in the door.
Okay, awesome. So let's say that you've got a company, they are doing killing it domestically. Everything's solid. They're looking good. They're maybe starting to hear some inquiries. Let's say we'll pretend US and you're starting to get people in Canada, saying, hey, do you ship to Canada? And so somebody's like, well, maybe this is time. Maybe, I've got this brand. I feel like I'm solid. I've done the things Ford has said. So walk me through step by step. What would you say you do next?
So I think Canada is a great example. 50% of our international volumes are going to Canada from US merchants. So that's probably the market that you want to start in. And the kind of other markets that you might want to look at as part of an international expansion, Australia and UK is kind of easier markets to get into for English speaking.
I'm noticing a trend. We got all the English speakers. Okay, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, between Canada, UK, Australia, if you get into those markets, it's probably going to be 70% of your volume, unless you're going to do super well in you know Thailand or something where your product is going to fit really well. But yeah, so in terms of market selection, Canada, UK, Australia, start with those markets and look for a carrier that's going to support those markets and it's going to support your product profile as well. So kind of three things there: looking at carriers, identifying your shipping solutions, and shipping solution, shipping strategy, and also understanding what is going to fit with those two things. So if you're shipping really large items, that kind of self-selects some carriers and some shipping options for you, some delivery options. But I think start with an understanding of who's in the market and what they specialize in.
Okay, so I'm hearing first step, pick the country. Do you recommend starting with a single country? I know that I recently read, I think it was Spotify, which, they don't have goods, but they wanted to expand really fast and went into like 40 countries and had a complete nightmare disaster and had to retreat and, they hadn't done their due diligence. So, do you recommend starting with a single country that you expand into? Can do you recommend against expanding? So let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to do the UK and Australia and Canada. What is your opinion on it?
Yeah, my thought is go with all three. To be honest, if those are
Okay.
the three that you think you'll do well in, um, go ahead and start with those three. It shouldn't be, and we can get into this a little bit later as well. But finding the right international solution, it shouldn't be a big lift
Okay.
operationally for you, and it shouldn't be a big lift kind of from an IT or technology perspective either. If it is, it's probably not the right solution for you.
Okay. So do you have to get your goods? So I guess let's talk logistics because I'm thinking and we're going to talk just specifically shipping here for a bit,
Mhm.
and we can talk about some of the other issues you may face as well that you should look into. But when we're talking the logistics issue, is somebody going to need to get a distribution center in those countries? Um, can they ship just having their stuff in the US? How do they? That's one of the fears, I think, is looking at
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
complexities around that. Well, how does that work?
So, you can do what works best for your business, but I think the easiest place to start is if your fulfillment operations, if your warehousing is in the US, start from US direct to consumer in local market. So find a carrier that will, uh, you know, pick up from your warehouse and deliver to your customer in Canada or UK or Australia. I think that's the easiest place to get into this. Certainly, yeah, you can step up and start operating at a distribution center in the local market. There's a number of different complexities with that, or partnering with a 3PL in a local market. But yeah, I mean, managing operations in different countries is kind of a whole new area of the business.
That's one challenge people face is kind of the complexities of the shipping and the logistics. What are some of the other risks, other concerns people have that are maybe holding them back?
Yeah. So I think another big area is getting your storefront ready for an international customer. And there's a couple of things to look at here, and a couple of things that partnerships with EasyPost and other shipping softwares can really help you with. Ideally, what you're shooting for is a domestic like experience for an international customer. So I think
Okay, wait, I had to stop you there. So, your goal is a domestic experience for an international customer. Everyone, that's a Fordism. That's a great one. So, you're trying to create that same experience so they don't even kind of feel like it was an international product that they bought.
exactly, yeah.
Okay, great.
So I think a couple of key things there is website translation, so
Hmm.
um, local language and local payments as well. So if you can get those two things off the bat, it's fairly easy to do. There's a lot of services that will help you with that if needed. Those two things definitely make it feel a lot more local right off the bat.
Yeah. And I want to say, I love that you said get translation on your website. Ford has only asked us to go to the UK, Australia, and Canada. And yet you're still going to need some translation here. Um, it may be English, but there are nuances in all of those countries, right? And so, obviously we know the spellings and some of the slight word differences, but those are all really critical. So I love that you pointed that out. You're going to need that kind of translation. Currency, that kind of stuff can be a little bit of a challenge sometime. I guess, do you have any tips around kind of the financial or currency? I know that like currency exchange, some big companies have had challenges with that in pricing correctly. I know when Target first went into Canada, of course, Target moving into Canada is this whole case study of their own that is like kind of a never ending challenge. But they ended up pricing things too high. They didn't convert well their currency. And so then, anyway, it ended up being very unsuccessful because the prices were a lot higher than what it would be in the US. So I guess, do you have any suggestions or tips around kind of currency conversions or what people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're doing business internationally, it's going to be something that you have to deal with. I think the scale of it, hopefully, for a lot of our e-commerce merchants, they're not going to have to take out like currency hedges or anything like that to assist with this. But having your customers pay in local currency is just a great first step to help with that. And to do that, I would say to kind of find a solution that will uh, can plug into the checkout process and handle that. It's probably not a core competency of the e-commerce business, so it's something I'd say to outsource. But yeah, that's my advice there.
Yeah, it's a great point. In this industry, I think networking and building out all the tools you have, I think a lot of people have more access to those kind of knowledge and information than they think. I think, as you said earlier, you said, oh, it's easier than you think. And I know that we have customers who call EasyPost and say, hey, I'm thinking about going international. Do you have suggestions? Right. And so I think everybody has different, partners you're working with already that you could kind of get some of that info.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to double down on that point. I mean, there's so many different um, players in this industry, and there's so many different connections between the different partners that you're absolutely right. I mean, reach out to kind of your first point of contact and see who they know and see who they can tap into as well. Because chances are it exists, it's built, and it's relatively easy to plug in.
And that kind of makes me think a little bit about culture as well. So we kind of talked about we got to deal with logistics, you got to deal with currency and exchange and all of those challenges. But sometimes there's slight cultural differences as well. Um, how can you maybe get an insight into what you should be aware of culturally? Do you recommend finding contacts in the local area that you chat with? Do you recommend trying to survey people online, social media to talk to understand them? I guess, how do you suggest kind of that market research and understanding into understanding those cultural differences?
Yeah. So I think there's two ways I would look at this. One is if you're an e-commerce business and you're getting organic international customers, chances are your product is going to do well if you add a few more marketing dollars and you
Mm.
tweak your shipping to make that experience a little bit better. If you're going to start brand new into a new country where you don't have any existing international business, that can be a lot more of a challenge. And I would suggest if you're going to go that route and you're willing to make a little bit of investment marketing wise, to work with an agency that focuses on that area and that can tweak some of the marketing content to fit the local market and to fit the kind of local consumer preferences. Um, but again, yeah, that's a little bit more investment on your part. I think, again, start with the countries where you might already have some organic international interest. Probably Canada, likely UK, likely Australia.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that one thing that, our community here, I just want to say, just because um, there are those cultural barriers doesn't mean that you shouldn't make an effort. One of my favorite stories is Walmart. When Walmart went to Germany, um, they didn't realize that, Walmart has their greeters. They were like, hi, welcome. Germans were very put off by that. And that was so weird to them and so out of their culture. You're going to make mistakes. Walmart makes mistakes. Amazon made currency problems with the bank transactions when they went international. They struggled mightily to be able to get their sellers payments fast enough. Instead of mistakes, I like to say opportunities for learning and growth. And so expect that there will be a few hiccups here and there. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. All those big companies didn't just say, okay, I'm not going to go internationally because we messed up. There will be some of those challenges, whether it's culturally, whether it's with your logistics and how you're shipping, but there are a lot of ways around those things. Another challenge that I can think of is maybe just dealing with regulations and customs and duties, and people get really freaked out by that. Any suggestions or tips in that area?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, that's probably, yeah, top, if not, top three questions or concerns that people have when going international. And there's a lot of different ways to handle this at this point, a lot of different solutions. So maybe just kind of very brief, what does this look like? So when you go into an international market and you start selling items, countries may assess duties or taxes on those items. Depending on the item that you have that you're shipping, might get hit with different duties. And those vary by item type, by country. I mean, you probably won't be an expert on duties, and you definitely don't need to be an expert on duties to be able to sell internationally.
Okay.
What I would suggest is to uh, avoid the kind of complexity of that with your customers as much as possible. And I would really push at this point a lot of our now DDP, which is delivered duties paid. And that's kind of the way to package up the transaction, the e-commerce transaction neatly so that your end consumer doesn't have to deal with any of the payment at the door of these duties and taxes that might be incurred. So um, yeah, as we kind of see the industry moving more towards a DDP experience and like a neatly packaged transaction at checkout, um, there's a lot of solutions that we at DHL offer, a lot of other carriers offer, a lot of third-party solutions offer to make that DDP experience very neat. And so I would say to look for a solution that is a duty and tax calculator or a plugin to your checkout. Make that process a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, I love that. I think that there are, first of all, I just want to say I totally agree. DDP is definitely kind of where we're seeing people move internationally. I think that that's just going to continue to grow as kind of a standardized process, that that's what consumers expect. Are there other complexities around regulations? So let's say, for instance, we'll just use you as an example. And obviously, as you've said so kindly, obviously you're team DHL e-commerce, but there are other shippers, there are other carriers as well. Let's say I came to you at DHL e-commerce and I'm like, okay, I'm going to use you to ship to Canada, and I'm located here. I'm in Dallas, right? Can you explain a little bit, like, what would I need to do for regulations? Do you guys handle that? How does that look? Can you just kind of walk me through what that would look like on the carrier side and what I would need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you came to us and you said, I want to ship items DDP, what we would do is uh, take a look at your product catalog and see what items you're shipping, and make sure that they can be cleared kind of seamlessly through our customs process.
Okay, so you would tell me maybe this item is not going to get through very well. Let's hold off on doing that one. But these items are great. They should go through customs, no problem.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So we would advise on that. And then, we would also, an enhancement for the checkout process, we offer a duty and tax calculator as well that you could use to offer your customers the opportunity to see the duties and taxes in advance of receiving the item.
So let's say, Ford, that you decide you want to do DDU.
Yeah, so that experience would be a little bit different for your end customer. And what that would look like is the kind of starting with checkout. Your customer would see item total and taxes, and they would check out as normal. And then when the package is shipped and arrives to their door or to the post office, whatever's the last delivery point, they would get a notification that they have to pay any duties and taxes assessed for the item in order to collect it. So instead of the duties and taxes being paid by the seller or the business, as it would be with DDP, they're paid by the consumer or the customer at the end of the line when they receive the shipment. I think there's a couple of like externalities with this. Some customers don't know that this is something that they have to do, and they might refuse to pay it. They might refuse the shipment. That's not a great customer experience. Even if you do tell the customer in advance that there might be duties and taxes that need to be collected when the item's delivered, if you don't kind of communicate the amount, it could be a surprising amount, and definitely not the best customer experience, in my opinion, with DDU.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say then that on average, do you feel like more of your customers, people using you, are more e-commerce kind of selecting the DDP model versus the DDU?
Definitely, it's almost all moving in that direction, I would say, for particularly for the kind of small and mid-size customers that are using DHL through platforms and through shipping solution providers, it's almost all DDP, just based on that
Okay.
better car conversion, better consumer experience.
Okay, that's perfect. That's a little bit of our market research we need to do right there. What are the competition doing? It's probably going to be DDP. Anything else? You mentioned that that doesn't create a very good customer experience. Anything else on the customer experience front that you recommend when it comes to international shipping?
Yeah, so a couple of areas. One would be to communicate transit times realistically. So, if you are offering a couple of options at checkout or during, kind of shipping selection, I would say to add, transit time windows to those, realistic transit time windows, uh, so that number one, you kind of reduce your Wismo tickets. If it's in a realistic time window, you'll probably get less pings about those. But also, you know, just a lot of international customers expect that it will take longer. That's kind of table stakes for ordering stuff from another country. So I don't think that it will be too surprising or it will impact uh, customer experiences negatively. I think it'll actually impact it positively if you communicate a realistic expectation.
Yeah, I love that. I think that transparency is just always key with consumers. If they feel like they know what they're getting and what they've signed up for, then it's kind of like you were saying with the DDU. Sometimes people don't know, and then that's going to create this upsetting feeling. It it brings about a little bit to me a question of costs. How do we control costs when expanding internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think, at the center of this conversation is striking a balance between speed and cost. Those two things will always be in a trade-off, whatever you're using as an international solution. But there are a couple of key ways that I think you can manage costs. So number one, and I know this might not win a ton of favor with my colleagues, but shop around for different carriers. See what is going to work best for you. Some carriers are more suited to different types of products, different types of countries, and their focus on certain areas will lead to lower rates for you. So that's the first thing that I would say about that. The second is maybe not always kind of top of mind, but tailor your packaging. A lot of carriers and a lot of uh, you know even fulfillment houses will use dim weight, dimensional weight to charge you. So if you're shipping, a box of pens in a pillow-sized box, that's you're you're going to get dinged for that. So use the right packaging for your product and use as kind of tailored packaging as you can. I would say that could be a great way to reduce your costs.
Oh, that's fantastic advice. I love that. Do you recommend offsetting any of the costs to the customer? Adding it to the price?
Sure. Yeah. So that's probably where we should start is figuring out your shipping strategy. So, if there's a couple of great toggles here, and most platforms, most shipping solutions will offer you the option to put flat rates in, to put free at a certain level, to use carrier calculated rates. So I would say, yeah, definitely take advantage of the levers you have there. Shipping, international shipping, in some cases could be 10-15% of the order total, if not more.
Mm.
It's a big factor. So if eliminating that is going to lead to further conversion, if you're in kind of a growth mode and you want to get into the market, establish a name, then yeah, I would strongly suggest to keep those costs out of the checkout process. But if you are wanting to pass that on, if you're pretty established, if you're shipping high value items, and it's less of a percentage of the total, then that's another lever that you can toggle.
That's awesome. And I just want to say as well to make sure you just keep testing, because that's what I'm hearing from you, Ford, is based on your circumstances. If you're in wanting high growth or whatever it is, it might be slightly different. So test out different options and don't just give up just because, you sent your Walmart greeters to Germany and they didn't like it. Whatever your mistakes are, just learn from them and move on. So one of my questions is also, let's say, returns. That's
Mhm.
another area that I sometimes hear, at least EasyPost customers are like, hey, I'm a little bit nervous about dealing with returns and whatnot internationally. Do you have any tips, suggestions around delays, returns, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a tough topic for sure. What I'll say about returns is to take a hard look at the kind of cost benefit of them internationally. So, you know, if then what I mean by that is it worthwhile for your business to either double the shipping costs for the customer to get the return back if needed, or eat those return costs, depending on where you're shipping. It's in what we see in many cases is customers are kind of unwilling to pay for that return shipping charge just based on the price. And some other complexities with it is it's kind of hard to get things back into the U.S. Ironically, we have
Mm.
a lot of customs controls ourselves that we don't necessarily have to worry about going outbound to other countries, but it might not be able to get back in. So it's a uniquely international return issue, but something to definitely think about. And yeah, so caution e-commerce businesses to, one, take a hard look at the return cost benefit profile there, and then try to catch as many things up front as possible. So, if you are concerned that something might get rejected at customs or something might not make it to the end customer, talk to your carrier about that and see what they can advise. They're a great source for identifying what can and can't ship. Validate addresses as much as possible to make sure that items are going to get to where they need to go and they won't get returned for being undeliverable. So just try to take as many of those off the table ahead of time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I always say your first return strategy, your first line of attack should be trying to not get something needing to be returned. So whether that's your, getting really good descriptions on your website of what the item is, if you've got, customers sharing, whether, if it was clothing, if it's too big, too small. I would also think if you have items that have kind of a high return rate domestically, maybe don't start by shipping those into internationally. Um, and I also think maybe you could do some resell or some programs in the country rather than trying to get it back. But again, as we talked about earlier, you're building that network. There are always people who are going to know. If you work with a returns company, if you, know people who are in the industry, talk to them about what other people are doing and how to deal with it. So just don't make it such a hiccup that you're too scared to try, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I'm just wanting to kind of picture the whole situation. So I've decided, I've got these signals, market signals, that it's time to go international. I've got some interest. I've been having, like you were saying, some people are wanting to buy products. I've done my market research. I've updated my website. I've got, translated the language. I think I've got my systems down. I've, worked out, let's say that I've gone to DHL, e-commerce, and I'm saying, okay, I want you to help me. Walk me through what that process would kind of look like from that point, just so I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a great way to kind of lead into a new program that we have just for SMBs, and that's a lot easier to integrate with now. I think our goal as a company was to tap this segment that was kind of previously, not really part of our core customer base. We have been working with a lot of larger customers, maybe with kind of developed warehousing and fulfillment operations, and had enough volume to sustain a daily pickup where we would come with a truck, fill it up with hundreds of packages, and then we're on our way. I don't think that model really fits, kind of where the direction e-commerce is heading, which is these smaller scale shippers. So that said, the kind of integration is a lot easier now, and it's available through uh, shipping solutions like EasyPost. We just launched with EasyPost for this new way to do business with us. So the process is you request a label from EasyPost just as you do for your domestic orders. This time for international, and you'll get a shipping label as you normally would, slap it on the package. And then with this program, you just take it right to your post office, drop it right with the USPS, and it goes on its way from there. That's the start of the journey. The end of the journey is, UK, Australia, wherever it's going to your customer there.
Okay. And so from there, once I hand it off, then you guys help deal with, again, as you said earlier, like the customs and we would have walked through that already. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the unique thing about our partnerships is when you have an integration with EasyPost and you select one of these labels, you'll see the duties and taxes and everything calculated up front. You'll know exactly what that will be. So when or when your customer is checking out, they are prepaying all those duties and taxes. And all of the kind of logistics of clearing customs and getting it to another market is handled by DHL.
That does make it super easy.
Super easy.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so obviously there's some easy ways. I love that new program. That is something that's really exciting. Obviously, if you're a big shipper, there's still all the great opportunities out there that have always been out there. Trucks are still going to be willing to come to your site. But yeah, for SMBs, I think that's super cool. Anything you wanted to say on that, Ford?
For enterprise customers, the integration is still with DHL. And so kind of all of the label requests, all of the data is going to go through DHL. And yeah, if you're a big customer, we'd still love to have you. I think what I was kind of speaking to is that this new program, you can ship any volume you want. With our large customers, we have volume minimums to make sure that it's still, worthwhile for us to make the trip out to your warehouse. But new program, ship anything you want, 1 to 1,000. We'll take it and process it.
Okay, what a fun way to kind of test out your international market. You got one package. You can send one package, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that is really cool. In the past, we've been stuck a lot with kind of some of those minimums and getting access to people like DHL. So that's really cool. Okay, I'm going to kind of summarize. We're out of time, but I want to summarize a few of the points that I heard, some of the key takeaways that I'm going to remember. And then I'm going to ask for you if there's any final advice you have or any final tips before we go. So number one, don't be too afraid to make the change. There's a lot of opportunity. It's not as hard as we fear. There are all those little things we talked about dealing with, customs and culture, and all of that, though, can be addressed by building out a network of people and support, whether that's your carrier, whether it's a shipping solution like EasyPost, whether that's, working with your WMS or your IMS, or you've got a lot of knowledge in your base out there. Work on building that up and creating kind of a good community of people to support you in this. Do your market research into what your customers are going to want. I loved the point where you talked about how if you've got something that's doing really, really well here, that's probably a great thing that you're going to want to try out. I also really liked your point about the fact that there are some things that might not clear customs, but when you work with carriers or whatnot, they can help you know and understand. And another final point I wanted to say was the DDP, that's really the model that we're moving into. So just from kind of an awareness standpoint, you can, however, get those costs done and taken care of by the customer. It doesn't have to be super expensive and crazy to do. And my advice is just to give it a try. Get out there and give it a try. Don't let fear hold you back. So do you feel like I missed anything, Ford? Any other big takeaways I should have pointed out?
I think that's a great summary. I think it's a really exciting area, and people should, be really excited about going international. I mean, that's an awesome thing to get your e-commerce business out into other markets. So take advantage of it, and absolutely, it's easier than you think. Leverage the right partners and the right solutions, and you know,
I
get
love it.
into a bunch of different markets.
I love it. That is perfect. Awesome. Ford, if people want to connect with you, are you on LinkedIn? How could they learn from your brilliance?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Ford Deihl on LinkedIn, and you can also send me an email, ford.deal@DHL, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time, everybody.